Okay, what I'm going to do is go over a little bit of overview. If you, excuse me, if you are one of the counties that are receiving this, or you in the future are one of the counties that receive this, these are some of the accounting issues that you're going to have to deal with, and so we want to make sure up front you kind of know what going into is required for these programs. As I understand it, and again, a lot of the information I've gotten in the last month from talking with Emma, but there are basically 3 types that you're going to run into in the most part. What she called the traditional SRF projects, which is their basic funding, and then these pooled or construction projects when that funding runs out and they go out and get the loans at their interest rate and then loan them on to the communities, and then those subsidization grants, which are the actual grant part of it. Okay. And the reason you need to be aware of which project you have is all of this grant is somewhat federal money. So if you get any of the loans or the grants, then it will end up on your schedule of expenditure of federal awards or your CFA. So you need to have the information when you're preparing your annual report at the end of the year for you to put in the federal portion of this. It gets a little complicated because there's different percentages, but we're going to try to go through how you need, give you the information you need to go ahead and get that on the federal schedule on that annual report on Gateway. Another requirement of these projects is that at the time they do the closing on these projects, they will have you set up trust funds with the Bank of New York. And there will be one fund. It'll either be a construction fund or a draw fund, depending on whether you're doing your traditional SRF funding or you're doing one of those pooled. And that is where the money comes to pay your vendors for the projects as the projects are being completed. You will also be setting up 2 trust funds that make up a debt reserve fund, and the Bank of New York will be your paying agency for repaying that debt. So you'll have a bond and interest fund, and you will also have a debt reserve, which is just like with any other bonds. You have 5 years to build up the necessary requirement in that debt reserve fund. But those will be held at the Bank of New York instead of in your regular accounts, and that's a requirement of the program, so it is something that you have to bear in mind when you're dealing with this. So with the traditional SRF project, if you get one of those, when you're filling out your grant schedule on the annual report on Gateway, you're going to check this as an advanced grant. It always asks you if it's an advanced grant or a reimbursement grant, and this is an advanced grant, so you want to check it that way. It is going to use the disbursements to determine what goes on to your schedule of expenditures of federal awards or your CFA. The other thing you need to remember, well, the second thing is on the traditional, as you get your claims approved, they have a second level of improvement with IFA. And when the Indiana Finance Authority approves that process, and we'll go over that a little bit in more detail later, they will then have the money put into in this case, your draw account, and within a day, it's going to go back out to the vendors that have been approved for payment. So in this case, your draws are always going to equal your disbursements out of that account, out of that trust account, okay? And 50% of those disbursements in the year need to be on your CFA at the end of the year, because 50% of it is federal and the other 50% is state. If you do a pooled or construction grant, the difference is you're going to get the whole amount up front in that construction account. It's still in that trust account with Bank of New York, but if you settle for if you close for a $3.8 million grant, you're going to have $3.8 million put into your construction account up front. And then you're going to draw against that. And so you're going to have disbursements each month that are where your vendors are being paid for the project, work that they have done. In that case, your draws are not going to equal. You're going to have one upfront payment, and then you're going to have your draws out until the project is completed. But it's still an advance grant. and it's still 50% of the total disbursements for that year need to end up on your SEFA. If you're lucky enough to get the subsidization grant, that is also an advanced grant. Your draws, again, will equal your disbursements. As your claims are approved, money will be moved into your draw account, and then they'll be taken out to pay your vendors. But 100% of that is federal, and that needs to then get, the whole amount needs to get together, presented on your SEFA at the end of the year. That's the one difference with that grant, is it's 100% federal, the other two are 50%. You will receive monthly statements from the Bank of New York. You need to pay attention to those. You need to open them. You need to look at them. These are your funding. Even though Indiana Finance Authority retains some control over these accounts to meet the requirements for their program, and they do oversight over them, it is still your funding source. It's still your money, and it's still your vendors being paid. So you need to make sure that you look at, if you've sent a claim in, and you will receive, I believe you do receive a notification when they put the money in the account from the Bank of New York. Okay. In addition to that statement, you'll get it so you know that it's been approved. So you want to make sure that that what's been paid out and what's been put in is what you approved originally. Okay. I put an example, if it's printed out here, I kept it out. Just of a sample of what, these are all made up numbers, so don't hold me to anything on those. But on a ledger, I don't know if you guys printed that out, it's probably easier to read if you have it in front of you than if I put it on the screen. But it's a good idea for you to keep a ledger of some sort, so you're tracking this information. Some of these projects take several months to a year to finish. In the first one I showed kind of the difference in a pool to construction, where you have, it's showing that on October 1st, for example, you get the $5.8 million into that construction account, and then you're going to have claims out each month. You're going to have disbursements out that are payments to your contractor for whatever project that's been approved. So at the end of the year, you have in this example, 1.7 million in disbursements. On the SEFA, half of that goes on the SEFA, so you've got that number there. But for your debt schedule, you have the whole 5.8 million. You've drawn the whole thing on day one. So when you're doing your debt schedule, you're going to have that whole amount. On a traditional or the grant one, which is the second, on day one, you're closing, but there's no money being put in the account until you actually have a claim approved. And so that's showing in that same, if they were exact same claims, money comes in and then is sent out the same month to your contractor. So again, you have the same amount in disbursements. For the traditional, half of that goes on to your SEFA. For the grant, the subsidization grant, all of it would go on your SEFA. For your debt schedule, you've only drawn 1.7 million, so that's the only amount you need to have on your debt schedule, because that's all you owe at that point in time until you draw more of it. So I hope that kind of clarifies the difference between the different formats this can take. I think the traditional is probably the most common. It's probably the most common that you're going to come into, and if you have an area that qualifies for the grant, that's great. Just remember that it is 100%. And with the subsidization grant, your debt schedule, you're going to have nothing because it is a forgivable grant. If you comply with the program, you don't owe anything back at the end of that project. So if you keep a ledger, something like this or similar to this, then you can check your trust statements against what you've posted as what should be coming into that account and going out of that account. If your vendors are calling you, if there's a problem with getting a payment, you've got a place to look to see whether you authorized a payment to them and whether they should have received it, and then you can check back with the Bank of New York or with the Indiana Finance Authority on why they have not gotten paid. But it is still your money. I guess I can't get past that, and you need to make sure you are accounting for that. The claims, when they come in, would be like a claim for any other construction project. You need to go through your same claims approval process. It needs to be approved by your office and then by your county. And the extra step is, and the claim has to be submitted to the Indiana Finance Authority, and they will do another review on that and approve it. Then they will make the recommendation to the Bank of New York, again, to put that money into your account to pay those claims out. So it's just that extra level, but it still goes through the claims process through your office the way all of your other claims go through. Okay. When it comes time to pay for that, your debt payments are going to go to the Bank of New York, to those trust accounts, that paying agency. I believe usually you pay 1/12 of your interest, annual interest, 1/12 of your annual principal into that bond and interest. And like I said, you have 5 years to get that debt reserve built up to the highest annual requirement of your loan schedule. And those payments, then the Bank of New York will make the actual loan payments back to the Indiana Finance Authority, but you'll be paying it to the Bank of New York. So the SRF debt does need to be included on your debt schedule that you file with your financial report, your annual report on Gateway, because it is a debt of the county if you have this program. Another thing to bear in mind is if, depending on what project you're doing, I think this would be a little different for county, any infrastructure assets that are constructed as part of this need to be included on your capital asset schedule if you retain ownership of them. I suppose there is a possibility you could do this jointly with another local unit, a town or a township or a regional waste district or something. But if you retain ownership or maintenance of those, then you need to keep them on your capital assets. If you're helping out and they're going to retain ownership of it and do the maintenance of it, then you would not need it on your capital asset schedule. If you're doing a big project and it's not complete by the end of the year, then on your capital asset schedule, it's going to go into your construction in progress, the amount that you have invested in that project up to that point. Okay. I've listed some information in here that you will need, so it's something you might want to remember if you do get one of these projects. When you're filling out your CFA, I've got the CFDA numbers for these grants. The clean water and the drinking water are the most common, but there is a brownfields that's available. It may not come up for you, but it is available. But these are the CFDA numbers that you need to have on your schedule. The Environmental Protection Agency is your federal grantor for these programs. That's also information you need on that. Indiana Finance Authority is your pass-through agency. I've included the program titles. These are what the federal government actually calls these programs. So you want the correct name on your CFA. So if you put these in, that will be the name that is correct for it and will be recognizable. Okay. Because the county does not have control over the trust accounts, the construction or the draw account, no money can be dispersed from that account unless the Indiana Finance Authority has approved those claims. Okay. And also for your debt service, you're turning that money over to that trustee to make your debt payments, but in essence, you've made your debt payments when you've given them that money. So we have determined at the office that for the regulatory reporting, this will not be required to be on your funds ledger, your cash book. It does not have to be on your annual report at the end of the year. Okay? You still need to track it, so you should keep a separate ledger. It doesn't have to be real complicated, but just so that you're tracking what's going in and out of this account, of these trust accounts, where your status of your project is, so that you can keep up with what your CFA is going to need, what your debt schedule is going to need, what your capital asset detail is going to need. But it does not have to be formally on your funds ledger. Okay. If you're a county that does a gap report or does a CAFR, and you get one of these grants, you probably need to call the office because there will be different reporting requirements for that. But for the regulatory reporting that most of you have, you do not need to include it on your annual report at year end. Do we have any questions about this? I know I went over it kind of quickly. When I'm not running around, you don't have